I'm having an identity crisis. We kind of use that expression, identity crisis, in our modern culture, and sometimes we use it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do think there is something to be said for a bit of an identity crisis in our own Catholic faith. And it kind of revolves around the misunderstanding about the sacrament of baptism. Now, John Paul II said, more important than the day of his ordination or the day that he was made Pope was the day of his baptism. And baptism is really the identity-making sacrament of the Church. It's the first sacrament. And in our first reading today from the prophet Ezekiel, written hundreds of years before Christ, we see some foreshadowing of what Christ is going to institute centuries later in the sacrament of baptism. So let's explore three things about our first reading today from the prophet Ezekiel. Now, the first thing we noticed is that the prophet Ezekiel says that God is going to gather people from every nation. From all corners of the earth, God is going to gather a people. And it's a really radical thing to think about. What constitutes us as Catholics is that we are baptized. It doesn't matter what language we speak, what part of the world we were born in, how much money is in our pocket, what color our skin is. What matters is that we are baptized. And that because we are baptized, God has chosen us and gathered people from every tongue, class, language to be part of the Church. We see that global aspect of the Church oftentimes when the Pope is giving an address or wishing Merry Christmas to a packed St. Peter's Square in 50 plus different languages. We are part of this huge body of believers. And that's actually what the Church is. It's a communion of believers. It's a community of believers who are gathered together in the Spirit. Second thing we hear about is that baptism cleanses us of our sins. We hear Ezekiel say that God will sprinkle clean water upon us to cleanse us from our sins. We see that also in our psalm today. But that baptism washes us of our sins. Anything that we have done wrong, that God's mercy on the cross spills over to us and washes us in the sacrament of baptism. And really, anytime we celebrate the sacrament of reconciliation, God's forgiveness again washes us clean and makes us new. The third thing we hear about is that we hear God is going to put a new heart and a new spirit in us. Think how crazy that is. That through baptism, God gives us His Spirit. God makes His home in us. God's Spirit dwells in us. And there's sort of a false understanding, I think, out there in the world today that Catholicism is just one option among many Christian options, and that you can go to whatever option best fits your needs. But the Catholic perspective is that once a baptized Catholic, always a baptized Catholic. No matter what we do wrong, the ways in which we may distance ourselves from communion with the Church, we are called back. We are called and are a part of this great communion of believers. So today, as you go about your day, maybe thank God for the identity that you have in Him. God who has given you His Spirit, the Spirit dwelling in you. God who has washed you clean and allows you to continue to experience that forgiveness in your daily life. And God who has called us from every tribe and language and race to be a part of His people, to draw closer with this new heart that we have been given to the heart of Christ.